If we've got a goal or something that we aspire to do, we can't say, well, in 10 years' time, it'd be great for me to spend more time with my kids. You have to be doing that now.
Welcome to the Parentrepreneur Show, and I'm very pleased and proud to welcome for my very first guest, a gentleman by the name of Dr. Adnan Ali, who I'm pleased to say I've known for a number of years now, someone that lockdown threw us together, and we've been in contact ever since and become good friends over that time. So the reason Adnan, I thought, would make a great first guest for the Parentrepreneur Show is his commitment to family, community, and his professionalism. And he epitomizes for me what I think a parentpreneur is. But without further ado, I'll not do the big long preamble. I'll ask you, Adnan, to tell me a little bit more about yourself, your background, your family, your business, and how it all puts together.
Thank you, Michael. That's extremely flattering, the way you kind of introduced me there. I think it's definitely lots of layers of jam and Nutella and all sorts on top. Yeah, so backgrounds as a doctor. I've been practicing medicine now for almost 20 years, actually, since 2006. Can you believe it or not? And it feels like yesterday. And one of the reasons I actually went into general practice was family. So when we had our son, that's when I realized that actually, family is really important. And there was something at the time that I came across. Was an article written by a palliative care nurse, and she'd interviewed these men in their last, months or days or weeks, and she'd asked them what their top 5 regrets were. And the top regret for the majority was not that they hadn't done enough or they hadn't earned enough or anything like that. It was that they hadn't spent enough time with their families, and they wished they hadn't worked so hard. And that really hit home for me as a value that I also wanted, was to value family time, weekends, evenings, etc. And so that's what drove some of my personal career decisions. So hopefully it gives you a bit of an insight into one of those, and that's something that drives me now is looking at values. That is a high up value there in terms of family. So, and then in terms of sort of community, again, being able to pay back into the community is again a value that transpired, I think, mainly through, again, working, getting to know people in the community, realizing what's going on, what the opportunities we've had that other people do not get, and how we have a moral responsibility to make a difference to other people's lives. And there's 2 bits to this. So you can look at it spiritually. So my faith is very important to me. And again, that pays into values, right? So, and from a faith perspective, it's, you're not on this world for yourself. You're not on this world just to kind of do your little bit and then go. You're on this world to make an impact or make a difference to other people. And interesting, one of the teachings or practices that's really encouraged is feeding other people. And that's not just about, physically feeding. I mean, absolutely it is. But also feeding other people means being charitable, giving your time, giving your expertise, helping out, finding those people that need something that you may be able to help them with, and going out of your way to go and do something for them, as being something that's actually going to benefit you in the end spiritually as well, right?
Yeah.
So that's I think that's where a lot of the community drive comes from. And then you look at the entrepreneurial side,
Yeah.
and it's just something that glues it all together.
Like the thread
Um,
that binds it all together.
yeah, and it's I think when you when you're in an employed role, you're doing and in fact I wasn't doing a 9 to 5 role. My first job as a GP, I did that for 2 or 3 years, and I was literally working from 8 in the morning till pretty much 8 in the evening, Monday to Friday, and then Saturday morning or whatever, and it was just full on.
Mm.
And you don't then get the opportunity to live out the values that you've decided are important for you, right?
Sure.
So then you have to start looking at, well, what are the changes I need to make in my life? And that may even mean your career or your work or whatever that allows you to live your values, right?
Yeah.
And I kind of accidentally fell into the entrepreneurial bit, but I always had that itch, always knew that was something I wanted to do. But I actually moved into kind of medical leadership, which allowed me to do a 9 to 5 job.
Yeah.
And just having those 4 hours back per day was it's just out of the world. I mean, I remember the first 2 or 3 days when I was working and I'd be home before the kids got home from school. And they're like, "Have you not been to work today?" And I was like, "Yeah, I've done my work for the day. I'm done." Are you what? We can spend the evening together. And it was I know this is for other people, they're already working 9 to 5.
Yeah.
And then that's what then drove me thinking, right, what else can I do to live my values even more? And you come across sort of these really well established speakers, and I remember there was a chap talking about and I love this analogy of the person practicing archery trying to hit a target, and it's not that one day he's just going to hit it and that's it. He's got to be trying to hit that target every single day.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the more he practices at hitting that target, eventually he'll hit it. So an archer, he can't just be shooting arrows, blindly, or not doing any practice, and then one day go and expect to hit that target. He's going to have to be hitting that target every day or trying to hit it. And that's the same way in living our values. So if we've got a goal or something that we aspire to do, we can't say, well, in 10 years' time, it'd be great for me to spend more time on holiday or more time with my kids or take my son wherever or my daughter, all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be doing that now.
Now, do what you
have
can.
to proactively start doing it. And it's, you might hit it straight away by chance,
Yeah.
but actually what's going to happen is you're going to miss. But the fact is, because you're trying, you're going to be moving very quickly in that direction.
Yeah.
And it's going to be noticeable, rather than just saying, well, you know what, I've got a target 10 years time, I want to quit whatever I'm doing and then I'm going to spend time with family. Well, actually, you don't know if you're going to be here in 10 years time, whether it's going to, is it going to be too late? Is something else going to happen? Is something else going to distract you? You're going to have some other, as your business grows or whatever you're trying to do, is there something else that's going to come in?
Yeah.
So it's really important. So those are those. So being value led, and then having some practices or some philosophy that allows you to start living those values, I think is super important.
I think that's a really good point that you make. It's just on a really practical level, 10 years time, your kids will probably want nothing to do with you. I know, that's probably likely to be the case with me. So putting it off until tomorrow is really not a good idea. And that constant iteration as well, I often say, good enough is better than perfect. Rather, just do something with what you've got where you are right now and iterate, just improve and build upon that. I think that's probably quite a ubiquitous trait or skill amongst the entrepreneurs I know. They're doers. One of the hashtags, how we met through the startup. One of their hashtags is GSD. Get stuff done or get shit done, depending on whether you're polite or impolite like me. And it is, isn't it? And
Yeah.
I think that's what I really admire about you, Adnan, is that you're a doer. You get on with stuff, and you're constantly tweaking and thinking and reading. I'm actually quite glad. Actually, I was thinking, crikey, I hope he's not sat in front of that bookcase, because I always get
No.
book envy when I see your library. I haven't got that. I've got
I think my background is blurred at the moment. I can't actually see myself, but
yeah.
I think it's blurred. I was on a different call but anyways,
So
there's definitely books for. I'm one of these people who buys books
yeah,
and then they get parked up, and my daughter, so she wrote she had to write like a thing for school about what you'd pack for holiday and what your family would pack.
yeah.
And for me, she wrote, my dad would pack 20 books that he hasn't read over the past year, and then he'd probably not read on holiday either. So that's excellent.
Is that true though, or is there one book that you? I know for me there was a book called Think Like a Tycoon by, and I can't remember the chap's name. I want to say it's William something or another, but I remember still to this day. I know which friend I lent it to, and I've never seen it back. But I do know that was the kind of the trigger for me, and I was probably about 17 or so when I read that. I'd done other things before that, but this was the first time I'd sort of read and had labeled and named being an entrepreneur and doing things differently to being a 9-to-5er sort of stuff. Was there one sort of seminal moment or one seminal book or person that
there is a book that I always kind of shout about, and it's called Bounce by a chap called Matthew Side. So he was I don't know if he was international UK table tennis champion, and he talks about how through it's all this nature versus nurture, and really what it's about is you can, or anybody can, become great at something.
Yeah.
You don't have to. So we tend to tell ourselves that we can't do something, and that kind of helps. We talk about values, and some people are, well, it's absolutely impossible for me to make these changes to allow myself to live this particular value that's really important to me, right?
Yeah.
And so he's very much on this concept of growth mindset, and of this 1,000, was it 10,000 hours of practice.
Yeah.
The fact that actually Mozart, was one of these extremely talented, in fact that's an understatement, right? Was one of these very rare, extremely talented people, right, musicians. But when you break it down, apart from the fact that he was a kid, about 7 years old or 8 years old when he became famous,
yeah,
he, by that age, had put in something like 10,000 hours worth of practice. And in fact, he was no better than a composer who was in their 20s or 30s.
Yeah.
But what made him great was the fact that he was a kid, right? So what that tells us, two things. One is that actually, okay, fine, there are certain individuals who are just going to go like Elon Musk's and the Richard Bransons on the world. Yeah. That's fantastic. But that doesn't mean that nobody else can get to that stage. It might take us another 20 years to get to where they are.
Yeah.
But it means that it's still possible.
Yeah.
Now, you've got to have some certain background kind of abilities, or for instance, if you wanted to become a power lifter, then you've got to have some physique, I suppose, and then work towards that. But generally speaking, anybody can do whatever they want.
And right? it's about laying those sort of laying those good sort of markers, that creating those good paths. You mentioned a couple of examples on that. Bill Gates is another one who's cited as a bit of a wonderkind sort of thing, but Yes, he was super bright, but probably not the best coder in the world. But he had an opportunity because of when he was born, and I think his mum bought the first computer for the PTA at his school, so he was
Yeah,
forever able to lock himself away
yeah,
in the library, and so he got those 10,000 hours in early. And Branson, I remember a story. I think it was his mum. They were coming back from a holiday by the coast, and he still hadn't learned to swim in the sea, and they passed a river, and she apparently stopped the car and just literally threw him in and, and made him swim.
excellent.
And another story where he was dropped a few miles from home and told to walk home at the sort of tender age of 5. So I guess the point I'm getting to is, as a parent and an entrepreneur, do you think entrepreneurs make better parents, or do you think their kids are just like, oh god, here goes another lecture, or here goes another sort of life lesson? Do you think it helps being an entrepreneur and raising kids?
That's a really good question. Really, really good question. And we were having this exact same conversation last night.
Oh,
So
really?
we went out for dinner, and I said to the kids, my son's 15 and my daughter's 12, I was like, you guys have got no excuse. Like, you've got literally the world in your hands at your fingertips. No excuses, right?
Yeah.
And um and and I said to him, if I gave you a bit of money each, like literally £50 or £100, what do you think you could do with it? And then got them both excited. And I was like, oh, my daughter's like, oh, how could, there's stuff on Etsy and you do this, you do that, and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And then, or I could start doing like a logo business. And what I'll do is I'll find people who can make the logo, and I'll find people who need a logo, and then I'll match them together. And she's 12 years old and she's
Love it.
thinking like an entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
So absolutely, I think it does impact kids, because not only do they see you kind of doing this very portfolioed, the variety in my day. I don't have a normal day.
Yeah, sure.
And I think they see that, and then they also hear the conversations that we're having. They know of the people that I'm, networking, my net worth, as you
Yeah.
call it,
Yeah.
right? And they realize that these things are important. Whereas I think if you don't have that exposure as a child, then you're kind of stuck in a very, very much a fixed mindset, a single vision
Yeah.
kind of worldview.
Yeah.
So definitely, I think it helps, and it's definitely not about creating kids who are just money minded.
No.
It's about going back to values again,
Mm-hmm.
and going back to that thing about, what is the difference you are making to the world, right?
Yeah.
And as a kid, if we can encourage them to be the absolute best at whatever they want to do,
Yeah.
okay, and then it's about making a difference in the world that's going to help other people. I think that's great. I think that's what an entrepreneur basically is about. A
Yeah.
sustainable one, anyway. There's definitely plenty of people who are just out there to make money,
For the quick
but
buck. Yeah.
but they're the ones who are up and down all the time.
Yeah.
But then there's those people who have that vision of change. And a really good example is at Patagonia, the clothing company in Australia, right? And you look
Yep.
at their founder and how it's all about sustainability and environmental impact and their employee engagement, all of that kind of stuff. And the difference that the founder actually made to the world.
Yeah.
Obviously, he's made a lot of money out of it, which is great. But he's also that wasn't his sole driver. And I think it's important that kids realize that. They realize that actually it's not just about that,
Yeah.
but it's also about your impact. And then the other thing that's really important, I think, when we're talking to kids, is to make sure that, because the world has changed, it's no longer get a job at 16, 18, 20, whatever, 25 out of university, and then, pay into the company pension and then retire at the age of 70 or 73, whatever it's going to be, and get your pension, and that's it. That's not what, there's previous generations, right?
Model's gone, yeah.
That model's out.
Yeah.
And in order for these kids to actually live a life that they want to live, they need to be able to fall back on methods or ways of working that are going to allow them to do that.
Yeah.
And be thinking about that now.
I think that's a really, really good point, because you're right. You were saying when you were at dinner last night that kids today, I sound like an old man, kids today, they've got it so easy, everything's at their fingertips. Literally, you've got more processing power than NASA had during the moon landings in an iPhone or an Android. But equally with that, there's also a lot of overwhelm. We are absolutely deluged with information these days. So it's almost like there's the basic tools out there, but the really kind of finessed qualitative tools that we need to be teaching kids is how to filter, how to be objective. And I think a really good filter for that is values, as you say. I'm a big believer, and funnily enough, this didn't really drop and hit home until probably about two and a half years ago, that the more people I can help, the more success I will see, be that financial success, be that sort of just having a warm and fuzzy feeling. But the more people you can help, the more successful you will be as an entrepreneur. So tell me how Healthality, which is your entrepreneurial sort of spin on your medical background. Tell me about how that fits in with entrepreneurship, what it is, how you live by those values yourself.
So interesting. Healthality came out of it was pre-COVID, actually, the idea, and it was a realization. So if I just take a little step back, so when I moved from being a day-to-day GP, seeing patients in 10 minutes or whatever, all that kind of stuff, and 20, 30 odd patients per day, and all the other bits and bobs, and you literally, there's a limit to how much impact you can make. It's one-on-one. And when I moved over to sort of medical leadership, and you're realizing now you're making impacts on scale. You are a decision you make doesn't impact just one person, it impacts a population. It might be a local population in a county or whatever. So you start realizing that actually there's different ways of working as a doctor, even, because it was always kind of drilled in that you're a doctor, you're seeing patients, and that's it. Well, actually, as a doctor, there's a lot more you can do to impact a lot more people. And then, so Healthality kind of came through that evolution of what can we do that's going to make a difference. And within the NHS, it was quite obvious at that time, so 4 years ago, that making an impact is very, very difficult due to all the constraints of finances, the impact that we wanted to make anyway. Finances, being commissioned to do something, and then being held to some kind of contract by a commissioner, and then you can't really go out of that. Can't do what you want to do, basically.
Very prescriptive.
And therefore, going into this kind of setting up this private practice, basically, which is what it started off as, was our way of saying, right, this is our business on our terms, and our commissioners are basically the people that are buying from us. And if they're happy with what we're providing, then they'll come and buy it. If they don't want it, they don't have to buy it from us. And it was a way of things. That was an opportunity then for us to come up with a model of care that we thought was the future, which is basically it's back to the future or back to the past.
Yeah.
So what we've done, what we set off with was, if you were to get a time machine and go back in, to the 60s or 70s, where your family doctor was literally that.
Yes.
Your family doctor may have delivered you as a baby and then known you throughout your life, your thicks and thins and whatnot,
Mm-hmm.
and you were able to speak to your family doctor, you were able to see them, they knew what was going on in your life. It wasn't just a 10-minute snapshot. They knew you, right? And we felt that, although is quite a difficult model to deliver at scale,
Yeah.
was something that we aspired to, and we felt that actually there's a way to do it. That unfortunately, due to, and actually COVID, just, we know what's going on in the NHS now, delivering that kind of care is just impossible.
Yeah.
Whereas privately, where people are happy to pay, that is possible. So that was our founding, kind of one of our tenets, one of our business values. And then it evolved from there once we realized that actually there are certain sort of aspects of people's lives that, again, once you start impacting them, you can actually start impacting at scale. And it brings in that value of getting to know people.
Yes.
So what it's evolved into really is a mission to reduce or stop men and women from dying prematurely from undiagnosed conditions like heart problems and diabetes.
Yeah.
And in fact, this week, I delivered some training at the beginning of the week on basic life support to a local organization, and I was just refreshing and doing some research on it and looking at some facts and figures, and it's mad. It's, the number of people that die every single day. In fact, every 8 minutes, somebody dies from a heart-related condition in the UK.
Wow.
That's just crazy.
Yeah.
It's absolutely madness. And you look at the figures for, men are much higher than women, obviously, life expectancies, etc. The fact that life expectancy has plateaued over the past decade, and in fact, in COVID, life expectancy reduced for the first time. I think it's almost just either a year or under a year for each gender.
Wow.
And then also the other thing we look at is quality of life, or so I think it's the number of years that you are expected to be unwell. Okay.
Yeah.
And that, averages something around 16 or 19 years, depending on what figures you're looking at. So somebody who's expected to die at the age of about 80 will spend about 16 to 19 years of their life in poor health.
Wow. 25% in poor health.
Yeah.
What amazes me as society, I hesitate to use the word evolve because it doesn't feel like it's evolving. It is, as you say, it feels like it's stagnating. It's not just that people are becoming sort of physically obese, but it's almost like the thinking is becoming fat and lazy too.
Yeah.
And people are, what I love about Healthality is I didn't realize this until quite recently, that it's a mashup of health and reality.
Yeah, exactly.
And that makes absolute sense from the description of what you've just been saying now.
Yeah.
It's something I know, because as well as being a sort of, a book collector and an occasional reader, I know that your health is very important, because we've taken, particularly during lockdown, when we could exercise with other people, we did quite a few walks and stuff, and I know that's a big thing for you as well.
Yeah.
Are you a big believer in sort of functional health, functional medicine, rather than finding a prescribed drug to make someone better?
Absolutely. So it comes back down to that, the quality of life. Okay, how can we? Look, nobody can change the day that you're going to die.
Mm-hmm.
You know, nobody knows that. Nobody can change that. But what we can absolutely do is improve or reduce those numbers of years that you're going to spend unwell.
Yeah.
Okay. And there's ways of doing that that okay, medicine, drugs, etc. has a place. Absolutely has a place. When somebody has that heart attack, or they start getting angina, they've got, severe restriction of their coronary arteries, etc. They need medical help. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But way before that,
Yeah.
where we know this person has got risks, okay, there's stuff that we can do that doesn't have to rely on medication to get that person to either their risk reduced, or if somebody's actually fit and well and in a really good state of health, to actually maintain that health.
Yeah.
And so, for instance, I know you're you love doing it. It's weightlifting, for instance, right?
Yeah.
Resistance training. There's lots of evidence coming out that shows, and it makes sense, that people who do resistance training into their older decades have got lower risks of heart disease, diabetes, cancers, dementia, right? Plus others. And if you think about it, what's going on, especially with things like diabetes, and diabetes is a leading cause of a whole load of other problems, kidney problems, your nerve problems, visual problems, etc.
Yeah.
That if your muscles are they're the glucose kind of burning furnace, factory, whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
right? It's a power station.
Mm-hmm.
Your muscles, so and they take glucose. You can imagine that's coal being chucked in, and they burn it. So if you haven't got those power stations, you haven't got the muscle there, and you're chucking all that glucose in, i.e. carbohydrates,
Yeah.
excessively, and you're not burning it off, then what you're doing is you're just storing it as fat.
Sure.
And therefore, and at some point, your insulin then starts becoming less effective, and then you start getting these peaks of glucose, and then that excess glucose then starts causing the problems with all the inflammatory processes that cause all these other issues, right?
Yeah.
So if we increase our muscle mass,
Mm-hmm.
or lean muscle mass, and we're making good use of that, and we're burning that glucose off, or actually that also, you can almost see immediately how that could potentially reduce your risk of diabetic related diseases, or in the future.
Yeah.
So that's just a very simple example of where functional medicine, so actually looking at your exercise regime, what you're doing, you may just be focusing on cardiovascular stuff. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
But you need to add in a particular type of a different regime that's going to also give you that lean muscle mass.
I saw a lovely, I think it was a little Instagram post yesterday, might even have been from Andy Tate, who's my trainer over in
I thought you were going to say somebody else.
Yeah, no, not the chat, not that Andy Tate, not Andrew Tate, but Andy Tate, Taters. He's my coach he's over in Vancouver Island. I think it was him who actually said cardio is like instant gratification for your body. It's kind of like getting a paycheck every week. Weight training or resistance training, he said, is like building up a passive income. That'll keep paying you in the years to come. And I thought that was a great analogy. And what you've just said now, it made me realize, I kind of look at my life. So my life it's like a milking stool. It's got three legs. It's got my entrepreneur life. It's got my family, but it's also got self-care, which I'll be honest, really has taken a bit of a beating over the last few years, and I need to address that much more. But those three legs of the milking stool, the thing that underpins them all is having good health. If you're not in good health, you haven't got the energy to do the business, because that takes a lot out of you. And then if that's taking it out of you, I become a crabby, grumpy dad, and I don't want to be that kind of person. So sewing the three things together, self-care, whether that's diet, as you said, or exercise resistance training, or just simple things like sort of being mindful and meditating, which are things that I try to do and encourage with the kids. Health is fundamental to being an entrepreneur or being a parentpreneur, being a family person and in business for oneself. Yeah. Is that a fair comment?
It's a fair comment. And, it's that old adage or cliche, whatever you want to call it, health is wealth. But actually, if you think about it, the origins of the word wealth actually come from health. Okay. I think it's back in 13th, 14th century, something like that. The original, when wealth came about, and it was, and a wealthy person was somebody who had good health, right? And you listen to any entrepreneur talking, on any podcast, I pretty much guarantee you at some point they're going to start talking about health, and well-being. And it's because it is absolutely key. I think they realize that without it, it's whatever you do is pointless. And those people who don't realize, once they start focusing on their health and they see the benefits, not only personally or with their families, but also directly within their own business, they see the power of it, and that they almost become addicted to it, if that makes sense. They're really into it. And they can't stop talking about it. But I reckon if you were to listen to any entrepreneur talking, at some point they're going to talk about health. Because it is super important.
It's so true. And for me as well, with my kids, they're both quite sporty, as you know, and they're only young, but I don't have to do much in the way of encouraging them to do that. I think I try to set a good example, half terms and stuff like that. If childcare needs dictate, one or both of them will come down to the gym with me. And I think setting those good examples as an entrepreneur and as a parent are really key. It's because you have to be very mindful and thoughtful. And I'm not dissing the whole world of employment and corporate world, because not everyone can be or is cut out to do their own thing. I get that. But what I think it teaches me most of all, and the lesson that I like to pass on to the kids most of all, is about thinking. There's a great quote from the late great Bob Proctor, which is 2% people think, 3% think they think, and 95% would rather die than think. Whenever I see my kids doing something daft, I'll go, 95er, and immediately they're like, no. What do you mean? What do you mean? They don't like the idea of not being in control of their environment. What would you say, in your experience, the three kind of pieces of advice you'd give to someone? Let's say they're about to embark on the sort of entrepreneurial journey, but they're kind of thinking, oh no, but I've got little Johnny, and I need to do this for them and this. What advice would you say about entwining the two things, entrepreneurialism and being a good dad, being a good parent?
I think this our conversation has revolved around values, and that we didn't set out to do that, but that's super important. And anybody that I speak to, so in the coaching work that I do, we pretty much start off on, what is it you want? What are the values that you aspire to? Either that you've got them now, you want to preserve them, excuse me, or the values that you aspire to, you don't have that you want. And a lot of people don't know that. They don't know what values they have. They know they want to spend more time with family or whatever. They don't know what the actual value is. So the first thing I always say is sit down, get a piece of paper, research your values. And actually there's plenty of resources online, and you can print off these lists of other people's values, basically. But actually that doesn't mean that's not an exclusive list. You can actually create your own values. Come up with your top 20, and then your top 10, and then your top 5, and then your top 3, whatever they are, values. And then that's the first thing. And then see, well, actually, what I'm doing at the moment, how does that fit in? Where's the gap? And then, being an entrepreneur, there's a lot of kind of romanticism, and actually it's really bloody hard work. Not knowing, are you going to clear enough to pay your bills at the end of the month, right? That's pretty stressful, that is. Whereas, and sometimes you think, actually, it was, if I'd remained in my job or whatever it was, and I know I get paid on the 27th every month, and it's actually the amount of stress that is involved in that. And going off sick, or taking your annual leave or whatever, not having to worry about having to have made sure that you've kind of covered all the bases and this, that, and the other. So it's not an easy journey. So your values really have to lead the way, because you will very quickly either give up or get into this kind of rut of, why did I do this? If you then don't have those values in front of you telling you why you're doing this. So that's probably the first thing. I can't remember the question now. Obviously, I keep rambling on. But,
no, just so well, you've given a piece of advice there. What else would you say to someone who is thinking about this but was kind of scared of finding? There's no such thing as a balance. It's a seesaw, right? A seesaw never sits still, and that's what I think it's like being a parentpreneur. It's a constant sort of. It's my karate. Shihan, my teacher, he always described it as dynamic equilibrium. Walking is dynamic equilibrium. You're always off balance, but because you're moving, there is a sense of balance. And I think life is like that as well. So what else would you kind of say, for example, in terms of carving out time with the family or time for work? How do you manage it? What advice?
So then you take your values,
yeah,
and you set your boundaries, basically. So what are the absolutes? Where do you compromise? Where do you not compromise? And that, I think, is then the next step.
Yeah.
Because again, if you don't set those boundaries, then they're always going to blur. Because as if you're running your own business, you can quite easily find yourself doing that 24/7, and then you're not living the values that you actually set off to do, right?
Yeah.
So boundaries, I think, is then super important.
Great.
Which sounds a bit counterintuitive in that, you became an entrepreneur to give yourself all that flexibility. But again, if you don't give yourself those boundaries, then you're doing yourself a disservice. And also the values that you're trying to live to, right? That's probably the second bit.
Okay. And I was gonna say, with great flexibility comes great responsibility.
Absolutely.
Very true. So that's fantastic, and they flow so naturally together. I can see that now. Values and boundaries. What would you say is there kind of a practical third step, the third tier to that?
I think I love the idea of so the third step then is setting up some rules. Okay. So there's a guy, I haven't actually listened to him for a while now, and he's my driving podcast that I always go to. A chap called Tom Bilyeu. He has a podcast called Impact Theory.
Okay.
And he talks about rules, and we always see rules as something that is hindering us or keeping us back, or especially when you look back at your school rules or whatever, and if you break a rule, you get a red card or a purple card or whatever it was, right?
Yeah.
But actually, rules can be really important. So rules then allow you to stick to values and your boundaries. So, for instance, a rule may be that you go to the gym for at least 4 sessions or 45 minutes every single week.
Yeah.
Okay. A rule may be that, and this is Tom's rule, is if when your alarm goes off in the morning, you have to be out of bed within 10 minutes. Okay.
Yeah.
Another rule may be that, and this is the distractions bit, right? Is that you will, things like social media, and again, you can quickly, as an entrepreneur, get sucked into, oh, I need to, be following this person or reading this blog post or listening to this podcast or whatever, or seeing what's going on LinkedIn, and I must update my Instagram and blah. And you can spend hours on that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And actually not find it productive.
Yeah.
Or useful, and therefore setting up some rules about, right, so it's an hour or it's 15 minutes or it's 30 minutes per day. That's what I'm going to do. Then allows you to work, I think, and again, it kind of goes back to your boundaries and then into your values.
It's like a little ecosystem that just keeps feeding off itself.
Yeah,
you're so right, because one of the sort of things I adhere to 7 days a week, even weekends, I've discovered is that having some sort of parameters. They don't have to be rigid rules, there's not a whistle and everyone has to line up sort of stuff, but if there is just some parameters within which you can work. I think I think it's a phrase from Jocko Willink, the American ex special services guy, where he says freedom lies within the discipline. So I always scribble down 6 things that I'll never have more than 6 things on my sort of list each day. I'll write them down just as they come to me, and then I'll sort of sit down and go, okay, which one thing here, if I did nothing else today, would make today successful? And you kind of, I find the days where I approach it in that way, you tick off the most important task. I talk about MITs in my writing. You tick off your main MIT, and that's it. Your day's kind of a success. So then if your kids come home from school,
your MIT,
most
important
task,
okay,
and
absolutely.
You can tick that off, and you could go, great, kids, let's go for a walk, let's go for a bike ride, whatever it is.
Absolutely.
So that's really fascinating. I like that. That's really sound advice. So values, boundaries, and rules in a little ecosystem. We'll put some sort of bits and pieces in the show notes. You mentioned Tom Villieu as well, and I know you've mentioned him before, and I really do have to dig that out. It may be that Tom is one of those inspirations, and I've got a funny feeling you might also say your faith, because I know that's very important. But what kind of 2 big inspirations do you have in your life? That could be a thing, it could be a person. Is there anything that you sort of immediately think of?
Inspiration. It's a good question. So,
or driver, or a driver.
So I think it's mainly people who inspire me, right? My dad is definitely one of those people, and we were chatting about this over dinner the other night. About how and interestingly, so we were talking about how stories and how it's important that we capture our parents' stories. And I always thought my dad had always just worked. Okay, actually, he has had an entrepreneurial streak as well.
Oh, fantastic!
And it's only and it's just I just remember. So I remember him telling us once how, and I know he had a business. He was a mechanic. He had his own kind of car repair shop, etc.
Yeah.
And but but actually, way before then, he was telling me how he once went and bought this clapped out. He's quite good with his hands, right? He bought this clapped out van,
Yeah.
brought it home. I think he paid like £100 for it. So this is back in the, I think, 70s, and brought it home, fixed it up, got its MOT passed or whatever, hand painted it, some random color. And then he started supplying groceries on a door-to-door basis.
Oh, brilliant.
Okay. And for whatever reason, didn't quite work out. But then he sold on the van, and he made some money on the van. And that was, his kind of entrepreneurial kind of thing.
Yeah.
And there's other examples as well. He's in, where he's, invested in a business, and then he's, I think the challenge is them far different to now, where being the sole breadwinner, young kids, etc. You don't have that same access to what we've got now. And I think if he'd had the opportunities that we've got, he'd be absolutely flying, right?
Yeah.
So that he's definitely an inspiration. And I think the other inspiration for me, I think, comes down to faith. So it is that thing about what is it that we're doing that's going to, it's not just about leaving a mark. It's not about being remembered in 50 years time or 100 years time, because that then becomes more egotistical.
Sure.
Right. It's about making that some kind of difference to other people's lives. And if you've got the ability to do that, so if you've got the ability to earn, £100,000 per year, or £1 million, or £1 billion, or £1 trillion, then you almost have a moral duty to go and earn that, not just to help yourself, but so that you can then use that influence, or use those resources to go and make a difference to other people. So, and it's interesting how that's not only just a something that comes out of my faith, but also when you look at other entrepreneurs, they have that as part of their kind of purpose and drive as well.
Yeah.
I know, for instance, Daniel Priestley, somebody we both know very well, not very well, but we know well. We've as a coach, and I remember sitting with him in one of his kind of round table things, and there were a few of us, and him asking us to put on a piece of paper how much money we'd like to make in the next whatever number of years, right?
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, but I've got my mortgage to pay off. It'd be nice to pay off my sister's mortgages and my brother, and blah blah blah, and have a nice little thing to maybe buy a house, have a rental income. I think it worked out to about £2 or £3 million.
Yeah.
And that's roughly what other people, that's the thinking that they had, right? And roughly what other people put down. And he goes, if you've put anything less than £1 billion on your piece of paper, you're being selfish. I was like, what? He goes, you may have thought about yourself and your parents and your family and your siblings and paying off mortgages and maybe having a little nest egg, but that's all you've done is think about yourself and your immediate family. You haven't thought about your community, the people in your local area, and in fact the world.
Yeah.
Okay. And if you're not thinking about them, then you are being selfish. And actually, I thought, you know what, he's so right. I fell for that trap. And it's so true. If you can earn £1 billion, which sounds like a lot of money, but I think in these days, and it still is a lot of money.
Yeah.
But if you've got that potential,
yeah,
absolutely should be going for it, not just for yourself, but to make that difference. So I think that those, that inspires me as something that then drives to.
That's awesome. That makes a lot of sense. John DeMartini, I remember listening to one of his books, and he was saying something along those lines. But you want to make a difference to your family, sure. You might make 1 million. You want to make a difference to your town. Yeah, you may make a few millions. He said, but if you want to make a difference to the world, then that's when you're getting into the billions. And you look at someone like Elon Musk. He's taken it even beyond planet Earth now. We've got SpaceX when they're not blowing up on the launch pad, but his ideal is to take humanity to Mars. That's big thinking, isn't it? That's a really good example.
Yeah.
Well, that's really good, Adnan. It's always a pleasure chatting to you. I'm just conscious of our time, and frankly, I think we could probably talk through another episode of this. So that would be great to have you back sometime in the near future.
Yeah, absolutely.
I always say connecting people has real value. So where can the listeners and the viewers to the Parentrepreneur Show, where could they find you? Where's the best place to find you and learn more about you, and maybe get in touch and say hi?
So probably LinkedIn.
Uh-huh.
And I cannot remember off the top of my head, but my LinkedIn, is it Adnan Ali or Dr Adnan Ali? But I'm sure we put it into the LinkedIn and podcast. So I've got, as you know, you were one of my first guests as well.
Uh-huh.
And so we have a podcast called Health Success: How I Do It, and it's available on all the platforms. That's probably the two places, and then I'm sure you'll find me randomly elsewhere.
Fantastic. That's brilliant. Adnan, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure as always, and look forward to catching up with you soon.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you.